welcome everyone. Thanks for signing in to this panel discussion about careers in public engagement with science. We're really excited for the event today and to hear from our panelists. So before we get started, I want to just give everybody a quick overview of what will be happening today. So as you know and saw on our flyer, we have 4 wonderful panelists that we'll be hearing from. But first, I would like to introduce today's moderators. So our moderators today are going to be Shivani Krala. She is an undergraduate student here at UC, graduating, I think, this Friday, with a Bachelor's of Science in Medical Sciences, as well as a minor in Integrative Health and Wellness. This fall, she'll be attending the University of Edinburgh in Scotland for a master's degree in science communication and public engagement. So Shivani is our first moderator. She is joined today by Kat Tim. Kat is a UC anthropology master's student here at the University of Cincinnati, who is also doing a certificate in public art and placemaking. And my name is Melissa Jacart. I am the associate director for the UC Center for Public Engagement with Science, who is co-hosting this event. But our main sponsors today are the UC Science Policy Ambassadors, as well as Research America. We have partnered with them and Kristen Goodale, who has also been behind the scenes helping us organize and bring this event together. So I want to give Kristen a big thanks and acknowledgement for all your help and helping us bring folks together. Today's speakers we have 4 folks today. We have Jerran Orwig, who is an Advanced Inquiry Program Manager at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens. We have Dr. Webb III, who is a Senior Researcher and Consultant at Design Impact. We have Cory Christopher, who is Director of Conservation at the Cincinnati Nature Center, and Brenda Hunda, who is a Curator of Invertebrate and Paleontology at the Cincinnati Museum Center. So they'll be our speakers today. What's going to happen is Kat and Shivani will briefly introduce everyone. And we also have prepared a few questions that we'll also ask folks. So we'll get a brief overview of all 4 of our speakers' careers and backgrounds. We'll ask them a few questions. And then after we've had those questions, we'll open up the floor for some general Q&A. So please stick around throughout the entirety, especially if you have questions for any of our panelists. At that point, we'll allow folks to unmute and ask questions and continue on this lovely discussion. All right, so with that, I am going to turn things over to Kat.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm excited that everyone is joining us today. With no further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jerran Orwig. Thank you for joining us. Jerran is the manager of the Advanced Inquiry Program, a joint graduate program run by the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden and accredited by Miami University, where she earned her MA in zoology in 2011. In this role, Jerran empowers graduate students to become leaders in environmental stewardship and community outreach. She's also a trainer and curriculum developer for the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, and previously served as the Public Programs Coordinator for Education at the Toledo Zoo. So Jerran, we'd love for you to kick us off, and if you could tell us a little bit about your current role and how you got started.
Absolutely. Well, hi, everyone, and thanks again to the University of Cincinnati and the Center for having me. I really feel honored, especially with the other panelists, because they're amazing people. So yeah, my name is Jerran, and my current role is at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. Yes, where Fiona lives. Let's just get that out of the way now, right? And my role, as you all have heard, is the Advanced Inquiry Program Manager, which is a mouthful of words, and I look forward to sharing a little bit more about what that means. But I'm going to go back to the beginning of my journey for a little bit, and I hope you don't mind if you indulge me in a couple of pictures, because I felt like pictures would be more exciting than just listening to me and having to see this for a little bit. So I'm going to show you some pictures. I think the biggest question that I always get when people, as soon as they figure out that I work at the zoo, was like, oh my gosh, how did you get to work at the zoo? That sounds like such a neat job. There is no one direct path, especially, I mean, to any of these careers, including the zoo. And so it's as I look back and even kind of look at the dots and the weird detours that led me to where I am today, just know it from a career perspective, there's so many different paths that you can take to get to that dream job. And I got mine. So let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen really quick. All right, so hi, I have to put the obligatory picture of myself with charismatic megafauna. In this case, this is Donnie, the cheetah. So he is massive now, but this was several years ago when he was born as part of our cat ambassador program. And building relationships with his trainers includes meeting other new people. And so I took the bullet here, and I just, I had to hang out with a young cheetah for a little bit. It was rough. But there we go. So I'll start there. My journey really literally does go back to childhood, of being enamored with animals in all sorts of ways. And so much so that my first word, just to the chagrin of my parents, was not mom or dad, but it was Piggy, because we had a guinea pig. And so Piggy was my first word. So animals have been a part of my life since the beginning and were really formative, but I didn't know that necessarily that it would lead to a full-on career. But just kind of shows you a little bit about my timeline. Pets were a really important part. And just growing up in rural Michigan, I spent so much of my time outside playing. And again, I didn't know that would lead to a career, but it was just really formative of what was important to me in building some of those things that I really cared about. I would say the first moment that I knew that animals could be a potential career moment was getting to have a close encounter with a dolphin, and really feeling like I made a connection with that animal in a way that I had never felt before. And I wanted to figure out, how do I do this for a living? So one of the first things that I did was, actually in high school, I joined the Toledo Zoo team program. So as a high schooler, it just gave me a chance to volunteer at the zoo, get to see a lot of different elements of what that life was like, and get to start talking with people, practicing my public speaking skills a little bit, learn about animals, just be around them. That was the goal, right? I just knew I wanted to be near or talk about animals. So where do I go? I'm going to go to the zoo. And that was my closest link. Went to university for undergrad in a biology, for a biology degree, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with it. If it meant vet school, if it meant field work, if it meant becoming an animal care staff or a zookeeper, what exact path I was going to take, I didn't know, but I knew that I loved science, and a good way to start was that biology undergrad. I thought for a while that being a zookeeper was going to be my path. So I spent some time interning as an elephant keeper intern at Toledo. And so I was doing husbandry, doing diets, helping with training sessions, et cetera. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But I found also part of that experience was hanging out with summer camp kids. Summer camp kids would come help me in the elephant yard for one day a week. And for some reason, that became the highlight of my week and of my role. And I started to think about why was that the highlight when I got to spend all of this close-up time with an African elephant? Why was having kids help me and getting to talk to them about those elephants? Why was that even more energizing? And so I got invited the next year of that to actually become a summer camp teacher. And that really introduced me to the world of public engagement. I had no idea that you could talk about animals and wildlife for a job and get to really inspire people with wildlife in that way. And I think that is the very beginning of what has really gotten me to where I am today, where my whole job is really working with people. But I will say a big turning point, a big monumental moment in my life was studying abroad in Kenya during undergrad. So my final year of school, I spent a semester living in Kenya, studying wildlife management, doing research out in the field. And again, I figured out very quickly, there you go, some obligatory photos of Mount Kilimanjaro. I figured out quickly that while there are research projects going out into the field and measuring vegetation and doing wildlife counts, one of my favorite roles is walking around Maasai villages and just talking with the Maasai about how did they feel about having wildlife in their backyard, and the human-animal relationships were there. And again, that human element that I didn't know was going to be important, but certainly over and over as you reflect back, I saw those touch points. So Africa, a plug, if you have the ability during undergrad or graduate to travel and to study abroad somewhere, please go do it. Life-changing. But those experiences led me to a full-time job in the education department at the Toledo Zoo. Also started my master's degree through Project Dragonfly. And I didn't know how important that journey would be until many years later. So did both of those at the same time and really just fell in love with that idea of conservation leadership and engaging people and how they can be conservation leaders in their day-to-day life, even if they don't work at a zoo like I do or a nature center or museum. They can be conservation leaders and champions in their everyday life and in their other careers, because we need everyone. And so that led me to my role today. So I am the Advanced Inquiry Program Manager. Again, it goes back to that Project Dragonfly master's degree program at Miami University. And I get to work with graduate students that are all searching. Oh, there you go. There's Toledo Zoo. Here you go. Here are some of my graduate students. So they are pursuing their Master of Arts in biology or Master of Arts in teaching and biological sciences. And during their time in the program, we're pushing them out into their communities to figure out what is their passion connected to the environment, but also what does their community need and how do we put those things together to make some really neat ecological and social change in our spheres of influences in our communities. So now I get to, in my role, just really support graduate students as they're changing the world as they earn their master's degree. And sometimes it also affords me some opportunities to travel and take those grad students out into the field and see where these amazing landscapes, wildlife live out in the world. Here you go. I'm just gonna go through that. And so that is me in a nutshell. I'm so excited to talk with you more and dig into some questions, but I'm really excited to hear from the other panelists.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was lovely. I'm going to introduce Dr. Curtis Webb III, who's a trained sociologist whose research and advocacy approach is based in the scholar-practitioner model and the work of W.E.B. Du Bois. The Du Boisian emphasizes the shared knowledge, production, community power, and a shared commitment to systems change for the liberation of all people. Dr. Webb brings his deep knowledge and experiences with social change, social inequities, racial analysis, and advocating for vulnerable populations to the nonprofit consulting firm Design Impact as their senior researcher.
Thank you for that welcome, and thank you, Jerran, for getting us kicked off. I'm excited to be here. I am an alum of UC. I got my graduate degree in there, so I did my PhD in sociology at the University of Cincinnati, and it was actually at UC where I actually found my path to design impact. And so I'm excited to be here today. I am Dr. Curtis Webb. My pronouns are he, him, and I am originally from Chicago, Illinois, the city with the best pizza in the world. I I don't want to hear anything New Yorkers, but I'm excited to be here with you all today. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and I always start there because I think my path to where I am now actually started off before I even knew what consultancy was, before I even knew what research was, before I even really quite understand social inequities and social inequality. And so in Chicago, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I was dealing with attempting to understand and experiencing social inequality, social inequities, particularly as it relates to class, as it related to race and ethnicity. And also Chicago was a very much a segregated city as well too, as it relates to class lines, economic lines, racial and ethnic lines as well too. And so I always reflect back now onto my experiences growing up where I did things like going to public high schools, public elementary schools, and noticing the difference. So I did sports and noticing the difference in the types of resources folks had, the differences in the types of even trajectories folks had, the types of training and capacity building opportunities folks have. I think there was something, as I was growing up, one of my favorite examples is always, so I joined the swim team in high school, and we were one of the only, maybe a handful of Black swim teams in the city of Chicago at that time. And so most of our meets and commutes were to places 30 minutes, an hour away. And really for me, what was the most shocking component of that time was really seeing the difference between our swimming pools, the difference between how large some of those schools are compared to our schools, the resources, et cetera. And so these are some of the things that were happening even before I really understood social inequities and social inequalities and even sociology. And so that led me to Atlanta, Georgia, and Morehouse College, which is a historically Black college in Atlanta, where I started to, well, I'll tell you all. So I actually started off thinking that I was going to be a journalist and I was going to save the world through my writing. And then I got to undergraduate and I realized that you had to take another Shakespeare course. And so I was like, that's not for me. I've had enough. And so during that time, I switched to philosophy because I thought I was a critical thinker. So I was like, I love the deep thinking, but even that was a little bit too abstract for me. And so I just happened to be taking a sociology class at the same time, and I loved it. I loved the ability to think about the social world, to actually have language for a lot of the things that I had seen or that I had experienced. And sociology, the theories that we learned about and the application of them helped me better understand the world and also think about opportunities, which is a big part of the work that I do now. And so fast forward again, got into research through some capacity building experiences at Morehouse. And then I came to UC, where at first I thought I was gonna be an academic. I thought I was gonna be one of your professors potentially. I have taught some classes in the past, but I think it was always something from me that was missing. It was in the sort of academic pursuit. I was able to do research, which I love doing. I was able to connect with students, which I love doing as well too. But for me, it always felt like something was missing when we were creating theories, we were discussing theories, and then it just ended after the class period ended, or it ended after the lecture ended. And for me, it was, I would say, wow, this theory is incredible. This theory is amazing. This text is amazing. Even knowledge creation in itself is dope. But I feel like what happens when we leave these classrooms and people are still experiencing a lot of the inequities and inequalities that we talked about every day? How can we use these theories in ways that actually benefit and help people live the lives they want to live in our society, in our communities, even in Cincinnati? Since this is going to align, I won't curse, but one of my themes is always theory without practice ain't it. You can fill in the blanks there. But for me, that's literally one of my mottos and sort of guiding me in my graduate school journey to the Cincinnati Project at UC, which was my first opportunity to actually go out and use the research skills that I have been acquiring at graduate school and go to nonprofits, go to community organizations and say, hey, I'm not coming to study you, which is another thing that we do quite frequently in academia. We go and study people instead of studying with people. I'm not coming to tell you how you should be living your life. Another thing we do, we tell people how they should live instead of asking them, what do you need to thrive? What does thriving and living a happy and sustaining life look like for you? And instead, at the Cincinnati Project, we really went there and we said, hey, we have research skills. What questions do you need answered? And so that was really, as mentioned in the bio, one of the Boysian traditions is putting people at the center of the work that you do, and also putting them at the center of their lives, and also acknowledging the expertise that they hold. People are experts of their own lives, whether we want to admit it or not. We don't have all the answers for other people in their lives. And so this is one of the ways we were flipping the research dynamic on its head to say, we're not going to be studying you, but we're going to be working with you and collaborating with you. And so with the Cincinnati Project, we went out to community organizations, asked them, what questions do you need to be answered? And really, that was one of the most fulfilling times that I've ever had and experienced in my sort of trajectory to where I am now. Really, one of the things that got me through graduate school towards the end was the ability to go out and talk with community members, community leaders, et cetera, and learn about the things that they were doing to continue to thrive, continue to make Cincinnati an incredible place. And so with that work, I sort of started to transition outside of I'm going to be a tenure track faculty member. I love you all who do it, but that wasn't for me. And I started to get more interested in conferences, in networking with folks who sort of found their way outside of academia, but still doing both knowledge creation. And for me, particularly, my major focus is on doing work that centers around putting people and community in this idea of placemaking. So finding places in sort of hostile environments, that understanding that structural inequalities and structural racism, et cetera, exist in our world. And so, but that doesn't mean that we just sit there and don't have any agency. We're all agentic beings. And so part of my commitment to this work is around this idea of placemaking. So the idea of placemaking is essentially an idea where folks are finding places for joy, leisure, activism, and meeting together in hostile environments. And so that led me to Design Impact, where currently DI, we are a nonprofit social innovation firm in the city of Cincinnati, where we center our work at the intersection of creativity, leadership, and equity. And we work with partners on a variety of things as sort of consultants to them in community-centered design, community-centered research, organizational change work, systems change work, et cetera. And I am currently the senior researcher. I actually have a new title now, just updated, Director of Systems Redesign and Community-Centered Research. And so I'm excited to be in that role because a large part of my work is actually thinking about how to connect sort of the structural inequities and inequalities to the everyday experiences of people and the everyday experiences of community members. And so I'll stop there, but I'm excited to be here and excited to share more about the work that I've been doing in my transition. Thank you all.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I can't wait to hear more details about your work. And I love what you said about the distinction between studying people and studying with people. And that studying with people feels like it aligns really well with this public engagement with science. Thank you again. Moving on to our third panelist, I would like to introduce Dr. Cory Christopher. Thank you for being here. Dr. Cory Christopher is the Director of Conservation at Cincinnati Nature Center, where he puts to work his passion for environmental education and public engagement and conservation. He's a University of Cincinnati alumnus graduating with his PhD in biological sciences in 2008 before returning to UC to serve as director for the Office of UC Forward and the Office of Undergraduate Research, Scholarly Endeavors, and Creative Practice. His expertise in plant ecology is complemented by his skills in problem solving, art, and public outreach. Dr. Christopher, please, we'd love to hear more about your career journey this far.
Oh, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Great.
Okay, good. So thanks for having me. This I love doing these kind of discussions, especially when it comes to trying to help people figure out what they're going to do in that next chapter of their life. I took a very circuitous path to where I am right now. And I was trying to figure out how to introduce myself today. And I'm a talker, so I have my timer set, and I try to restrict myself to PowerPoints. But so I did have some slides I want to show you, but only just to illustrate what you guys are going to be hearing from. I'm going to try to interject some humor because the presentation that I decided to give you is actually one that I've given before. And so I'll introduce the presentation, and the presentation will introduce me. It's going to be very zen, and we're going to go all over the place, but you'll love it, I promise. So the presentation is really just trying to both teach you something. So I hope you guys are okay with learning something today, but then also to sort of expose myself, to just put everything out there. And it's a topic that I've only recently become comfortable with giving. I'll sort of explain why that is as we go through the topic, but you're gonna think I'm taking you way off track, but I'll get us back there. I promise I'll get us there if you let me. Now let me share my screen. I've done this I don't know how many times, and every single time I feel like I'm going to screw something up. Can you guys see? What are you guys looking at right now?
We see your presentation.
Okay, it's on a different screen because of course it is. So I'm going to wind up looking back and forth, so don't get dizzy. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about me, to introduce myself, but then also to tell you how I wound up where I am now. So I'm just going to start off with, I'm going to have to go over here. I guess the take-home message for my little piece today is that a lot of my career decision, a lot of my decision to go into public engagement with science has been circumstance. I wish that I could say that there was some more strategic way that I got here, but there just wasn't. I grew up in North Georgia. I was the son of a Southern Baptist minister, grew up in a very, very conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist hometown, incredibly strict parents. And what you see in this map here is this little red dot is, can you see my orange cursor too? All right, so that was where my home was, and this is where my grandparents lived. And the yellow line is a trail that I walked, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of times growing up. The part I hate talking about is the part I try to go through quickly. Me and my brother were survivors of child abuse, and so we did not grow up in a particularly stable home, despite the fact that my dad was a minister. And so I was never comfortable at home, and I took every opportunity that I could to go to my grandparents' house. And so this path was my safety. It was where I went to get away, literally to hide, to run. And so I will say that part of my passion and focus on conservation, to me, it really is sort of like saving family. I mean, I feel that I owe something. I need to give something back, because this little pathway, it's about a mile long, literally saved me and made me who I am now. I also want to say that I have Tourette Syndrome. It's not like what you see in the media or television. Those depictions of Tourette's are absolutely just outlandish, very rare. They don't typically happen. I'm not going to teach you a lot about biochemistry, but what I want you to know is that people with Tourette's, in my brain, you guys know serotonin. A lot of you might know what serotonin is. It basically helps moderate your moods, and it helps make you happy if you get sad, and calm you down if you get angry. People with Tourette's like me, that portion of my brain that typically responds to serotonin doesn't respond to serotonin to calm me down. It responds to serotonin by making me do tics, twitches, other little vocal utterances. And so that's why you see people with Tourette's making those movements. It's not them, it's their brain. Serotonin gets pumped into their brain and their brain thinks, oh, we've got to do some more tics and twitches. If you get nervous, your body produces more serotonin. Mine does too, to calm me down, but that doesn't calm me down. It's this vicious cycle, right? So years and years and years later, I find out that nature, there's a variety of mechanisms. I was going to post those papers, but I decided that was a little dense. There are a variety of research studies now that have confirmed the role of time spent in nature on serotonin in your brain, anxiety levels, everything from very specific bacteria in the soil that allows you to sort of calm down, to viewing fractal patterns in nature. Actually helps your brain sort of focus and be able to basically take a step back and calm yourself down. And what I didn't realize is that a lot of the therapies for anxiety and chronic depression, things that go along with Tourette's, because of that serotonin piece, a lot of the recommendations from doctors are to spend more time in nature. And we're now looking at a little more Eastern type medicine to say, hey, you know, it actually does work and we have some evidence. What I didn't realize is that I was self-medicating by going to my parents' house and spending so much time outside. It was the only time I felt safe and normal and not anxious. And so this, like I was saying about a fractal pattern in nature, any pattern that repeats itself so that it's the same at every scale as a fractal, our brains are wired in that way. We know that when you are listening and paying attention, literally the physical arrangement of the neurons connecting one to another is a fractal pattern. So our brains even think in terms of fractal. So I'm going to stop sharing. I know that was super fast, but the reason I went through all that is I grew up, I was not supposed to really go to college unless it was a community college, because if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you don't go to college. I did it anyway. I didn't know if I was going to do art or ecology. So I started at the University of Georgia. I happened to have a close group of friends and some really good advisors, and they guided me towards ecology. I loved it, stayed on for a master's degree at UGA, and wanted more. I just wasn't finished. And I thought I was going to be a faculty member. So I went and got a PhD here in Cincinnati. That's how I wound up here. Met my wife, stayed here, started having children, and eventually found my way here to the Cincinnati Nature Center. And my focus here is both on leading all land management, wildlife management, landscaping, basically like the human resources for everything living that's not a person. So plants, animals, you name it, I sort of help manage. And I'm also in charge of conservation at large. So basically, what kind of programming do you develop to help people feel, one, empowered that they can be conservationists, two, teach them what that even means, and then three, how do we do it in a way that's not judgy? I hate eco-shaming people. That's a lot of what people in my field do. So I'm here driven internally by this need to protect the nature that protected me. And so I will say that a lot of my views on nature conservation are very deeply personal. So I do have to sort of pull that back a little bit because I understand why that is. But like I was saying, a lot of where I am is just circumstance. I found a few people who supported me along the way, glommed onto those people, and focused on what I was really passionate about. And it just so happens to have been nature. And as a Southerner, I love talking to people. So putting those two things together, it was easy for me to sort of forge this career in public engagement with conservation. And that's it. That was pretty short.
Thank you so much for sharing with us and being so vulnerable today. We appreciate you.
Yep.
I am so honored and delighted to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Brenda Hunda, who is the curator of the Invertebrate Paleontology Department at the Cincinnati Museum Center since 2004, and she also serves on our Pew's advisory board. Her position includes exhibit design, educational programming development, community outreach, and curating the largest collection of Upper Ordovician, I had to learn how to say that word, fossils in the world, and developing a research program and sharing the joy of one of the highest diversity fossil sea bottoms in North America. So without further ado.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always love working with pews and hearing everybody's stories. What's really fascinating being the last person to go today was that I see a lot of connections between the four of us and how we got to where we were or where we are. And a lot of that has to start with childhood and our experiences there. And that sometimes what we don't know at the moment is going to be impactful, shapes us upon, we know has shaped us upon further reflection a little bit later. So I think that's really fascinating. I kind of have probably maybe one of the straightest paths towards my career in the history of the world. I wanted to be a paleontologist since I was 3. I think it's in my DNA. I don't know how else to explain it. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom and a dad who's in the Canadian Air Force. I'm Canadian, so you'll hear some A's come out every once in a while. Because my father was on radar, he was responsible for monitoring for Russian activity in NORAD airspace during the Cold War. We had to live in the middle of nowhere. And so I grew up on Air Force bases with huge perimeters up on the highest hill possible, which in Saskatchewan is really hard to find. And just the complete and total freedom to be outside all of the time, a common thread we all have. And so I was that kid that was always outside. And for me, I was fascinated by the ground. For some reason, I was always digging in the ground. I remember my mom would get a little upset with me when I would take all our silverware and sort of like dig holes in the clay underneath a slide at school so I could see how far I could get down to see what was down there. So the ground was always fascinating to me. Of course, which is helpful as a paleontologist because that's what we do, right? Lots of ground digging. So it just was always something that I wanted to do. Neither of my parents had ever been to college. I was the first person in my entire family to be in college. And I think what really fascinated me about paleontology, I learned through a lot of reading and a lot of books because I was very isolated. I didn't have a lot of resources up in Northern Canada on Air Force bases. And so I learned through reading a whole lot. Didn't have Dinosaur Train back then. So there was no like, oh, the Flintstones, that might've been it. That could have been a big component. So I just taught myself. And, my mom's friends would always say, she's really smart. Why doesn't she want to be a doctor or a lawyer? What's with this dinosaur thing? And my mom would say, that's what she wants to do. And I support her. That's cool. Right. Everyone always told me I'd never get a job in the field because they're so rare. So that's not true. Anyway, so I moved to Edmonton, Alberta when I was 10 after my parents split. And that was the big city. And so I had occasion to have other resources there to further my love of fossils. The Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Southern Alberta was a place that we would go on field trips. And I always remember those experiences and loving all the dinosaurs. And of course, things started out for me as dinosaurs, as they do with a lot of kids. So I just took a straight path and went right to the University of Alberta to do my undergraduate in honors paleontology. It was what I was going to study. And I had this really unsupportive undergraduate advisor who was this older man who didn't believe that women should be in paleontology and didn't think that women should be in the field. And when I did my undergraduate work, there wasn't a single female faculty member in the whole Department of Geologic Sciences or Biological Sciences at the time. And I wanted to do my master's work with him, and he told me that he wasn't going to take me because I was a woman, that I wasn't capable enough, and that I didn't belong there, that it was a male discipline. Well, that pissed me off. So basically, so I just basically decided I wasn't gonna let that stop me. Now, in the meantime, in my undergraduate, my mother had had a major car accident, and I needed to stay home to help with the family and help her with the family. And so I couldn't leave for my master's degree to go to a different school. So I ended up staying at the University of Alberta, but instead of working on dinosaurs, which I'd always wanted to do, I ended up working on a completely different group of animals called trilobites, which to some people, might be like, that's not a really huge chasm because, it's still fossils. But the difference between dinosaurs and everything else in paleontology is like a huge chasm. Okay. So it took me a while to kind of get used to the fact that I wasn't going to do that. But then I learned that I absolutely fell in love with them, the more and more I learned about these animals. And so shortly after I started my master's degree, my mother passed away. So I didn't have the obligations that I had at home anymore. And I was able to move to the United States to do my PhD at the University of California in Riverside, which consequently I did my field work out here in Cincinnati. So I had, doing a lot of research, had made research ties in the Cincinnati area, knew a lot of the amateur collectors and paleontology amateurs in the region long before I ever got a job here. And then in my 4th year, the position at the museum came up for curator of invert paleo. And I just thought, well, why not give it a try? And they liked me and I got the job. So I have been the curator of invertebrate paleontology at the Museum Center for 18 years. My job principally involves curating fossil collections. We have a fossil collection of over 1 million specimens. We hold collections for research and educational purposes. So we have people from all over the world that inquire about our fossils, want to borrow our fossils and use them for primary research. We also use them in exhibits, educational programming, and so forth. They're part of the biodiversity library that the world now has that we use to understand all the events in the history of life on our planet. And so it's really, to me, a service to my paleontological community and to the progress of science. Plus, I'm an organizational freak, so it totally hits that button for me. I like that a lot. I also have a research program where I do independent research, which involves paper writing and grant writing and all kinds of fun things. I was the editor-in-chief of a major international paleo journal for 6 years. I just got freedom from that last November. Another part of my job, which I think is fantastic, are these community services, which I really do enjoy. I also do any kind of writing, consulting within the museum on any exhibit development that has to do with science, any educational program that has to do with science, I'm usually involved. I do a ton of public outreach, which I really enjoy. And then on top of all of that, I just managed to get myself involved in just about anything that can happen at the museum. I'm not perfect I'm not really good at staying in my lane. So I like to just know what's happening all the time with everybody and how I can contribute and help. Because I truly believe that we haven't had them for 2 years, but those accidental hallway interactions that you have with somebody where you're like, how's your day going? What you working on? Oh, let me see if I can help you with that. Some of the best ways to share and gain ideas and really do very cool, interesting projects. So, and I used to say that when I first started my career, I wanted to be that paleontologist that you see on National Geographic that wears the cool boots and the Calvin Klein khakis and jumps out of a helicopter onto a glacier, that kind of thing, which by the way, I have done, minus the Calvin Klein khakis. And the National Geographic part, it wasn't on TV, but, and be the biggest, most famous paleontology academic in the entire world that I could possibly be. But kind of like Curtis, in some ways I thought academia was going to be my track, but I felt something was missing in it. For me, 5 people reading my paper that I just wrote and published wasn't enough. I needed to tell the stories, and I wanted to tell the stories. And so I always say that I started out as a paleontologist in a museum, but now I'm a museum scientist who happens to be a paleontologist. And that's how public outreach and public education kind of has switched my perspective on the role and importance of scientists in our communities. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunda. I just want to say thanks to all of our speakers. I have learned so much, and I think they've been absolutely lovely. We're going to move into our question and answer, the ones that we've sent to our speakers beforehand, just to get things started for them to talk about them. And so I want to ask our speakers, what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered connected to public engagement with science?
Teenagers. No, I say that in jest, because teenagers are a hard group to connect with when it comes to engaging with science, you know. But I think for me, if I may start the conversation off, you know, one of the most challenging components I find about public science education is just connecting with people and general apathy. I find that, and closed-mindedness. I find it's very hard to have a conversation and to share insights, information, perspectives. I'm always a big believer in you need to meet people where they are and not just pontificate what it is that you think they should know, but meet them where they are and have a dynamic interplay. But it's very hard to do that when people don't care and don't want to be there. And so for me, I'll just set the conversation off by saying apathy and just people who shut down. It's this way, the only way. You can't, you know, we're not going to have that conversation, particularly around hot controversial topics related to things that I deal with, like climate change and extinction and all that kind of stuff, evolution. You know, these are some of the big controversies. You know, I find that closed mindset and apathy is really challenging.
Yeah, I think related to that, I'm glad you said that, is for me, I often talk about, like you said, climate change, other conservation issues, invasive species, things that people will sometimes take personally, because there are a lot of people in positions like mine that I just call it eco shaming. They just try to make you feel so bad about your behaviors that when I start talking about climate change, for example, some people will immediately bristle because they just expect that I'm about to make them feel bad about the car they drive. And so one of the challenges that maybe one of my biggest when I talk about, particularly like Brenda said with climate change, is making sure the people I'm talking to know I am trying to meet them where they are, and that I myself do some of the behaviors that I'm trying to encourage all of us to do less of. And so just making sure that they feel as though I'm not putting myself above them, but that I'm really trying to figure out how the two of us, if I'm just talking one-on-one with someone, how can we get to where we need to go together? Because I have things that I need to change too. So that's been my biggest challenge, is people instantly think I'm about to rake them over the coals because they, you know, again, they drove to wherever we are. Meanwhile, my car's in the parking lot too. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll add on to the conversation as well too. Two of the things that came up for me was both accessibility. And so I think one's accessibility. So a lot of things we consider science just aren't accessible to community folks, to people who don't spend hours and hours reading, studying like we've done. And so a lot of times, going back to some of the commentary, folks are taken aback because they don't have access to the articles, they don't have access to the books, or it's written in such a way that we barely understand it and we're in the fields. And so I think that's been one of the challenges for sure, is just like, it's hard to translate some of the concepts and materials, which, especially if we're talking about things that impact people in the public, it feels like they should be able to understand it, that I should be able to give an article, et cetera, to my grandmother or aunt. And if it impacts them, they should be able to read it and apply it. I think the other piece is around application as well too. And so if you're telling me all the things. I think, Cory, this comes up in a lot of conversation that I have about like climate change. Not that that's my field, but if you're sort of telling people all the things that you know about it, and I think we don't respect that science doesn't have to come from scientists. And so people are oftentimes bristle when someone who's been trained, and I think there's a certain level, of course, like we've trained to be deep into these fields. And so, yeah, we probably can cite some articles, maybe know a few theories here, but we oftentimes don't respect that science creation and knowledge creation doesn't just come from academic spaces. And so when we get into non-academic spaces, folks look at us and say, well, I lived it or I experienced it. And you're telling me based on your theory that what I experience and live isn't correct. And I think the path forward from that is to both acknowledge lived experience as a form of knowledge, as a form of science, and also translate a lot of the things, the theories, which are super amazing and useful that we come up with into ways that are accessible every day to people. And so I think, and the last piece I'll add is like, going back to the information piece, a lot of the challenge is both misinformation and surplus of information. I love a good social commentary on anything, but even I get extended reading all the different commentary, seeing all the news bombard me every day, all day. And so it's hard for me to keep up. And this is sort of my industry and my field. And I think that's one of the constant challenges I'm seeing when I'm doing so we do a lot of consultancy and work with our clients to sort of, I'll be honest and say that a lot of times the things that I'm communicating are sociological theories, but I'm taking the time and effort to communicate them in accessible ways. And what I oftentimes get in response is a new news article, a new news headline that has appeared across folks' TV. And again, just sort of tying the bow on it and bringing me back to the top of my comments. Also, people just don't have access to a lot of the materials that we've taken time and efforts to study. And so I think the other panelists have mentioned meeting people where they are. I think we have to do a better job of being gatekeepers from science and what science is, and also making things accessible so that me, you, the person outside, the person you walk past in the grocery store, both has access and can understand and apply the work that we've been doing.
That group covered it. I think just one last challenge that I didn't anticipate was actually the challenge of taking care of yourself. In this field, we're dealing with deep issues, whether it's climate change or environmental justice. And it takes a toll on, we know we're so focused on other people, and we just want them to understand and value what we value, and we want them to get it. And so we're racking our brains trying to figure out, how do we tell stories in the way that resonates and hits the heart. And it's really important to take care of our own hearts and brains in this, because it's tough work. And I don't think I knew that going into the field. You almost feel like the pressure to always be Pollyanna and like, yes, we can make change and we can do this. And especially when you're at a forward facing person that's constantly talking to other people, learning to take time to take care of your internal just heart in it, and having colleagues like these amazing people here that know what you're doing and going through. I think that was an unexpected challenge that I think has become really important. And thankfully, I think our field is talking more and more about it, but certainly not something that I knew I was getting into once I decided to put my heart into it, because all of us were here because we are in very mission focused fields. We don't check out of it at the end of the day. It is who we are. And so that takes a toll if you don't take care of yourself.
I just wanted to, that's an excellent point, Jerran. I need to go to the spa. for certain, and relax a little bit. I also think sometimes that some of the greatest challenges as a public science education is the nature, and maybe not so much the nature of science itself, but the public perception of science and how we get that across. In some ways, it's its own enemy when we talk about science, and this is because we've all been taught, or at least in my generation, that science comes from a Western perspective, and it's very white, it's very male, it's very all these things where we get together in these big auditoriums and we pontificate the laws of nature, and then we're going to tell you that this is how it needs to be. And if you've ever taken a history of science class, you know that this is what you're getting. But that's not reality, and that's not the only way to view the world. And as Curtis said, there are many other ways of knowing, lived experiences, different cultures, and that those deserve to be part of the conversation. And they need to be part of the conversation for people to feel respected, listened to, and engaged as part of public science education and public science engagement. And I know that we're talking about these things, but I think we have a lot of work to do in those areas as well. And I certainly am learning and still learning all the time on maybe how to try to do a better job of that.
I just wanted to plus one what Jerran was mentioning about the taking care of yourself piece. And really just emphasize that, because as she mentioned, like, these things just go home with you. And I think, especially in the fields we're in, and when you're doing any sort of change work, it oftentimes doesn't happen overnight, over a few months, over years. And so sometimes you're sort of doing the same work and doing the same things time and time again, and looking for your impact. And sometimes it can be disheartening and discouraging when you feel that you're either getting impact or you're on your way to it. And both the conditions of the world we live in, or even another thing I forgot earlier is like funding as well too. Like funding for this type of work is few and far in between. Change work is not a money-making work. I'll talk a little bit about capitalism in the next question, but change work is very rough, very difficult, and we're all connected to it in one way or another. And if you are doing this work, you're still thinking about it when you're laid in the bed at night, thinking about that email, that project, that communication, that other person that you could be reaching, et cetera. And so thank you for adding that to the conversation.
Wonderful. This has been a really rich conversation so far, and I'm excited to hear people's answers for the next question as well. Open to the panel. Do you ever find ethical implications or complications arise within your area of work? And if so, how have you navigated them?
I do. I only talk about one because, you know, you run into them. For me, I consider myself a storyteller, and knowing what information to withhold is important, because you don't want to bombard the people who are listening to you with so much information that they just, you know, roll their eyes and get confused, or they're just tired of listening to you talk. And so there's one particular campaign that we are no longer really we support this one campaign, but we're no longer putting it out there in a big way. And part of the reason for that is when I first started, I said, you know, the things that we're promoting aren't actually going to help anything. And the response was, but it gets people excited about the field. It helps them feel as though they're a part of something bigger. And to me, that was an ethical issue, because I knew that, yes, it might be getting those results. People might actually be feeling good about themselves. They might be feeling good about this action they've taken. But I knew that action wasn't doing anything. And so it was hard for me to embrace not giving people 100% of the information, because I felt like I was lying or withholding from them. So it was really hard for me to look at those situations and to go through with what we as an organization had decided to go through with. Not that the Nature Center didn't want to lie to anyone, But it was when I came in and was questioning all these things that we did, that we had to take a big step back and say, okay, how then are we going to authentically tell these stories, still get those same responses from the people, still make them feel empowered, still make them feel a part of something bigger, but to make sure that we're not withholding information that they need to know or they should know. I don't have a specific answer. I think I've navigated this particular ethical issue by just asking myself at anytime I'm talking to the public, is what I'm saying true to the best of my knowledge? Am I telling them to take an action that is going to be impactful? If I'm not, and if what I'm telling them to do is just busy work, or it's just to placate them or make them feel good, I don't do that thing. And if I don't have some call to action at the end of a talk that is real, authentic, impactful, then I don't give that talk. And I guess that's not really so much navigating this issue as it is avoiding the issue. But that's what I've run into a lot, like almost daily. How much information do these people need to know? How do I do it in a way that is fair to them, that meets them where they are, but yet doesn't make me feel as though I'm lying or hiding something?
I'll just say I love the call to action piece. I think a lot of times, and I think it's actually our responsibility, as I was talking about who makes science, who can disseminate science. I think it's our responsibility to make that connection, the call to action. Similar to the theme that you were talking about, one of my biggest challenges, I don't think it's a personal challenge, but I think it's an industry challenge. And so I'm working in the nonprofit industry. And one of the biggest questions I always ask both my organization and other organizations is, what's the purpose of our work? And when I say that, going back to what Cory's talking about, are we doing stuff just to say we're doing it, or are we doing stuff to actually make change? Because my thinking is, and I guess this is I was talking earlier about the capitalism sort of ethical dilemma, is I think that we should be working ourselves out of jobs. I think that the work that we should be doing should be done in such a way that, specifically in the nonprofit industry, we shouldn't be in communities for 30 years doing the same thing we did 30 years ago. So if I'm in a community doing the same thing I was doing in 1970 in 2022, and I'm not saying that places should cease to exist. However, I'm saying that your mission should be different. The services should be different. The types of activities should be different. I am less thrilled and pleased when organizations like mine or others who are saying that they're helping folks continue to do the same thing in communities and never evolve. I think we should want to do our work so well that people don't need us. We work alongside with community organizations and other larger institutions. And a large part of the work that we do at DI is around leadership and capacity building. And so like one of my favorite experiences, we do like community, we train community members to do research on how to do research. So we give them skills on how to interview, how to create interview questions, how to analyze data. And we actually like do those types of processes along with us. And so the point of that is to say that, so if someone has needs for community or community center research in the future, they don't need to contact Design Impact because they already know how to do it themselves. Our role was to help equip them with skills so that they can continue to move forward things that are of interest to them in their lives as well too. And so I think for me, that's sort of the biggest complication, if you will, because we all like to work. We all like to have money to eat and sleep and all those types of things. However, I'm of the opinion that we should be doing our job so well with people that they don't need us anymore. So that is my ethical, if you will, complication.
I have a couple in my experience that dovetails directly onto that, in that we're also, of course, the Museum Center, a not-for-profit organization, and we will get companies that come in that might want to donate for a particular project, But a stipulation of that is that we write language in a certain way so as not to say what they would rather us say vaguely than what the science bears out. And so their money comes with stipulations of content. And I've come across that before where I've been told I need to write something, not by my leaders or anything, but by the company, that, you know, you need to write it in such a way, like, we don't like the way this language is out. Can we make it a bit more wishy-washy? Can we make it a little bit less certain? And I'm basically like, I'm a scientist. This is my professional reputation. I'm out. I will not do that. This is what we know. These are the facts. You'll need to get somebody else because this is my professional reputation as a scientist. So, you know, those kinds of things do come up occasionally in our work. Another one that's completely different for me is really the ethics of storytelling and the voice, I think, with which you tell those stories. So our business at the Museum Center is to tell the stories, whether it's the history side of the museum or the science side of the museum. And typically, particularly on the science side, but also in terms of colonialism on the history side, those stories have been historically and continue to be in many cases white male stories. I go back to this again, right? So I'm always questioning, what story am I telling? Whose story is it? And whose voice am I missing when I am telling the stories? Let me give you an example just to kind of cement this in your mind. And this is something that we're actually really working hard to do at the museum. One of the areas it's world famous for its fossils is Big Bone Lake, Kentucky. And if you read it's in 20 miles just south of the river here. It's where Thomas Jefferson asked William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame in 1806 to go and dig mastodon and mammoth bones out of the creek and send them to the White House. There's a long story there. Anyway, it's billed as the birthplace of paleontology in the Western Hemisphere, vertebrate paleontology in the Western Hemisphere. It's got this huge long history with the likes of Lewis and Clark, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. It's a fascinating place. Anyhow, when you read all the narratives, French white men discovered it in the 16th century, and that was it. And it's been basically that story and nothing else ever since. But we know that that's not true. We know that Native Americans were here. We know we have evidence that they knew of the fossils at Big Bone Lick, that they used them for tools, that they created lore and stories to explain what they were finding, and they interpreted based on what they were finding. And nobody has been telling those stories, you know? And we want to tell those stories as part of that story. We don't want it to be a Western science story. We want it to be all voices to be heard. So that's an example of how ethically you have to really think about when you're telling the stories, is say in an education program or an exhibit or so forth, whose story are you telling, and are you missing the voices that you need to include? That requires a lot of extra work, but it's a much richer, more diverse experience for everybody when you do that.
I would say this is also just more industry-wide within the zoo and aquarium field. You know, a question that we will often get asked about are about animals in managed care in human situations, and getting questions about that ethical piece. And I would agree with Curtis. I think if you were to talk to anyone that is in the zoo or aquarium field today, we wish that we didn't have to have our jobs. I think it would be the desire for anyone in our field that if we knew that humans and animals could coexist in a thriving way, and that these animals that you could have these interactions with these animals without coming to a setting like a zoo or aquarium. Great. And looking back at the history of what zoos were, to that like menagerie style entertainment basis, to where we are finally now today, and the work that we do accomplish as zoos and aquariums is significantly different. And if I were to look back, I would never work for an organization back in the old days, I should say, and what it stood for. But thankfully, our field has drastically changed and still is evolving. And a few folks have mentioned about the history of conservation and colonialism. And especially again, when in a zoo and aquarium field where you are very inspired by wildlife and you are often focused on that wildlife. And for a long time, it was to the detriment of people. So regardless of what was happening, as long as we get to talk about saving African elephants and stopping poaching, without bringing in that conversation of, well, why is this happening? What's going on in those communities that is, and in other countries, what is fueling this system, and looking at it from a systems view and recognizing wildlife conservation is about people. And so how do we make sure that it's a holistic story that we're telling? And yeah, we're not just adding seats to the table, we're building the table together with all of those stories. So that's something that I've personally, just as I've been a zoo person my entire career, and watching how has the zoo field changed and how has my view of what is conservation has drastically changed even in my time. And I'm thankful for that, as we as a field, I think, are learning that how to center and make it a more holistic endeavor.
Thank you so much for all your insights in your fields and finding those overlaps as well. I'm going to go ahead and ask the last question, which is, what is a key piece of advice that you would give to someone looking to get into public engagement with science?
As always, I have a million things to say, so I'll happily start the conversation. Sorry, guys. There's a lot of advice. I mean, Jerran's excellent discussion about taking care of yourself is something that would be really important to bring up here again for this question. But one of the things I would ask is, if you're thinking about getting into this career field, really think about what engagement and the meaning of engagement means to you. When I first started, I thought people wanted me, and maybe some did, to give a lecture at a women's club or a men's club or a high school about what it means to be a paleontologist. And I would sit and talk for half an hour, and then that would be it. And that was my public science engagement moment. And in truth, that's what I thought people wanted from me. But that's actually not engagement at all. That's just me talking for an hour, which can get really boring really quickly. Now, I still do those styles of lectures for certain groups who really just want to, for some reason, hear my thoughts on things and my science. But really, for me, engagement is almost exactly the opposite of that. And in some ways, it's smaller scale, larger impact. In the sense, I can talk to and lecture to the Bengals stadium, but have more impact and engagement in a school classroom where there's more of a dynamic interplay between me and the people that I'm talking with. I like to ask questions. I like to make it a conversation. I like to hear what people think, know where they're coming from, and work with them there and make connections. And it's also really about listening an awful lot to the people you're talking with. So really think about what you define engagement as. It has evolved for me over the past 18 years a lot. And I find it to be a much richer experience if you walk in there with an open mind and an open heart, and you relate and you empathize and you work together on a subject, rather than just being a lecturer that just spits out a bunch of facts to people who just are gonna anyway. And so that would be a key piece of advice that I would give.
I'm going to quote my dad, amen, because that was, yes, 100%. And I was actually writing things down because that was one of the things I wanted to mention. So this was going to be tough to explain because I don't even know what words to use. So if we all imagine just for a moment that we are able to sort of separate our facade, the scientific public facade, separate that from who we really are, and think about that piece of who we really are that we hope no one else around us ever finds out about. right? That those secrets that we don't want our professional colleagues to know, right? What I've learned, and it took me forever to learn this, is I try to approach when I'm talking to people, or if I'm out on the trails here walking and I encounter somebody, I have to remind myself that that person also has a facade. They also have those things that they're quote unquote hiding. And I've been most successful if I just approach everybody without that facade and just assume, you know what, this person may know absolutely everything about what I'm going to tell them. They may know more about this than I do. I'm going to talk to this person about deforestation when they lived here and they actually saw this field when it was a forest. Like, really, I'm going to share that with him. So I've just tried to remind myself to approach every situation as if I've known this person forever. We both know each other's deepest, darkest secrets. And now I'm just going to have a conversation with them about this topic I want to talk about. And to not, don't be personal, or don't take things personally. Don't try to, judge them or, again, eco shame them. The other things related to that I've found success in, this is just me, is one, I said I'm a talker. Engaging people with science, like Brenda said, is not just talking. There are lots of ways to engage people in science, and you never say a word. One of my favorites is art. Scientific illustration is one of the reasons that I embraced ecology, because I just thought it was so beautiful. Those artists, whether they knew it or not, were absolutely engaging me in science, and I don't even know what they looked like. I never heard them. So think about those other ways of engaging people that have nothing to do with words coming out of your mouth, right? And then the other thing that I try to remember, and I'm not as good about this, but I try, is when I approach somebody, I have to ask myself, are they at a place to listen to me? I'm not going to get political because I'm not allowed in my job. I'm representing the Nature Center, but the political environment can get pretty testy. And sometimes you encounter people and you can tell, you know what, this person's not in a place to listen to me talk about climate change. And I don't have an axe to grind, nor do I need to teach lessons today. I'm just going to engage this person superficially, and that's okay, because that's what they're ready to hear right now, right? And then, even if they are ready to listen, is this person in a place to act? If there's somebody who's just worried about how to get childcare for their children so that they can go to work, that's not somebody that's in a place to talk about buying an electric car. They're just not in a place to act right now, and they may not be in a place to listen to you right then. And that's okay to just figure out, can I just not engage with them? Are they in a place where they need to be engaged? And if so, where do I start? I think about, like Jerran talked about Kenya. One of the examples because I spent a little bit of time in Kenya too, and one of the things that I learned from people there, the Maasai actually, was people telling them how to go about living, how to go about conserving resources, and yet there was a drought and livestock are dead, and they just need to know that there's going to be a next week. Don't try to tell them about saving lions then, right? Like, there's a few more things to come before that. They just were in a place to listen, certainly not in a place to act. So I know that was a sort of a drawn out amen, but those three things have been key to my success. Not that I'm that successful, but that's what I would say has been key for me.
All right. We were playing who's gonna go game on Zoom. Always fun. So I think just what I was hearing is definitely, like, I think there are both tactical things that you can do to prepare for, but also it's very like personal things. And I think Cory and Brenda were mentioning some of those, like one of the things that as you enter into this realm of working that you need to put up forefront is vulnerability. And that's what Cory and Brenda were talking about. And so that means that you are both providing spaces, creating spaces, and entering spaces as sort of your full self. And as Cory has mentioned, not sort of putting up a facade that I'm this and you're that. I'm a scientist. I know better. I know your life better than you know. I know this world better than you know. Another one that came up from Brenda was around like cultural humility. And so understanding that you will be entering into lots of communities with people that you may not have any connections with, and that you should be a learner in that space. I think one of the things we oftentimes say at Design Impact is coming into spaces with a learner's mindset as opposed to an expert's mindset. And so knowing that you may be a subject matter expert on some things, but there are always still things you can learn and always still things that you can hear from folks as well. And sort of the last sort of personal piece is, I think one of the things I would definitely recommend is for folks to think about, what's your superpower? So what's that thing that makes you get up every day, or that thing that just lights up for you when you're doing it? And think about ways that can be applied. I think there are so many industries that can use a lot of great gifts and talents, whether that's something from along the lines of like video work, or that's something along the lines of more scientific, like you're a researcher, like the entire there are just different possibilities. And I think it's more about figuring out what is the thing that you really love. For me, that was research and connecting with community, figuring out what's the thing that you really love to do, and using that as more of a guide as you're looking into these types of areas and opportunities and fields. Because some days the only thing that you want to wake up to, the only reason you're waking up is because you know you're going to have that one meeting that's going to be lovely, that you know that you're going to move a stream of work along. And some other more logistical things I would say is definitely go to conferences. Find UC has money laying around. Find some money from UC to fund conferences and things like that. Go to non-academic conferences for sure. Go to industry-wide conferences. Go to a conference if you're interested in working at zoos, for example. Go to conferences where people who work at zoos are. You don't have to be in the industry yet, but there's so much content and information you can learn there. Also, look for work, internships, et cetera, while you're in school that give you a glimpse into what the possibilities are. And so you can try it out before you actually enter into the industry. And I think the last one is really around like networking. Do informal interviews with folks. I did a lot of those before I went into the field. A lot of people are more than happy to talk about themselves for 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, tell you what they do, how they got there. And so go into it with that mindset of just learning. And through that, you'll be able to both build your network and learn more about the industries that are out there.
Keep mine short. Ask questions and like people. I think you can get far in any field, but particularly ours, if you're asking questions and just genuinely trying to like people. And I know it can be hard sometimes. People come into my field because they don't want to work with people. They want to just hang out with animals. But at the end of the day, they still figure out liking people is an important piece. And then I think Curtis and I were on the same wavelength with the superhero metaphor. But I like to say it's okay to take the cape off and know that when we're entering into conversations, we don't have to use your superpowers, but we don't have to be the superhero that's going to save the day and save the environment and save the world all on our own. It's okay to take the cape off and just be a human. And that goes far when you're working with people, especially talking about a subject like science.